Good morning, good afternoon, good evening, everybody, from wherever you're joining us all around the world. Thank you for spending your time with us today. I can still see a load of people trickling through the waiting room and through their inboxes and through their calendars for their reminders. So we're just going to wait a few more moments just to get started. So the people who are still grabbing their coffees or maybe something stronger, depends on where you are in the world. Um, I know I'm getting towards that way
Yeah.
where I am. So yeah, we'll wait a few more moments just for people to trickle through. I'll do a little bit of housekeeping just while we kind of wait for people to jump in their seats. So first thing, yes, the webinar will be recorded. You'll all be receiving a copy of the recording in your inbox as well. So if you wanted to recap all the insights that myself and Ed are gonna be talking about today, then you're gonna have that straight in your inbox. If you have to dip out and miss a bit, then obviously you'll be able to catch up on that as well. This is an interactive session, so please put your questions into the chat or the Q&A. Myself and Ed will be monitoring those as we go through, and we'll take them as we go through the session as well, and then we'll have a bit at the end if we do have any extra questions as well. So please make it interactive. Like we're here for you guys. We're here not just to talk to each other. We've had plenty of time to talk to each other. So
That's
yeah, so
true.
please make it interactive. As best as best you can. Um, and then yeah, and then we'll have a poll at the end on kind of like what you want to as a follow up and other topics you may want to discuss in the future as well. But so I can see the waiting room's kind of slowed down a little bit. So let's kind of dive into the content a little bit and away we go. So we're here to be talking about cyber resilience day. So the title of the webinar is the three pillars of cyber resilience, right? So what does that really mean? Well, we're going to be talking about that in a bit more detail. So, but first, let me introduce myself. So, my name is Chris Rogers. I'm a senior product marketing manager here at HYCU. I pretty much exclusively look after our hybrid cloud offerings. So that would be Nutanix mainly, but also VMware, Hyper-V, Dell, those types of kind of on-premise workloads that you know and love. And I'll let Ed introduce himself as well.
Yeah, so thanks so much everyone for being here. Thanks, Chris, for hosting this and Haiku as well. Ed Collins, Director of Product Management for Data Protection Solutions at Nutanix. Been at Nutanix since about 2019, held a couple of different jobs, the last one being I own the BCDR PM function at Nutanix. Just took on this strategic level role, which hopefully is a signal to you all that Nutanix is really leaning into the data protection space. We really want to start listening even more closely to customers such as yourselves. So really happy to be here. Yeah, why don't we just get this thing kickstarted, Chris? Yeah.
Absolutely, let's go. Over to you, Ed.
Awesome, awesome. So the new model is here, as I like to say it. Data is the centerpiece of the modern enterprise. Probably no news to anyone here listening, of course. Your data is your IP these days, right? Your competitive advantage, and your lifeblood, frankly. Uh, and cyber attackers know this, which is why the number one target, statistically, for cyber attackers is backup repositories. You spend an awful lot of time focusing on that, and it's becoming more and more complex. I like to think of it this way, though, in brief, whoever controls the data controls the enterprise. That's wonderful if you've got control. You've got, wonderful tooling set up for cyber resiliency, but it's not so good if the attackers make their way through. There are many factors that are affecting this new paradigm. For example, to no surprise, with the advent of new technologies around artificial intelligence or AI, systems are generating data exponentially, new kinds of data, vector databases, and so on and so forth, synthetic data. That's wonderful, but it comes with a certain set of precautions, right? Of course, that's in addition to an upswing in traditional data protection or data producing workloads, things like enterprise apps, databases, everything that goes on inside of a user VM, and so on and so forth, right? It's a lot of production of this data. There's a convergence of data, if you would, at the atomic center of an enterprise. And folks like yourselves are realizing that this data is a wellspring, right? So this data, given the right access tools for mining it, becomes a a tremendous source for myriad business level processes. So the consumption model is increasing as well, and that essentially opens up the aperture, right, from a security perspective, with more tooling accessing that data. The wider the aperture, the more attack, the larger the attack surface has to be, which means you have to be, more cognizant and more prepared, and have a even stronger cyber resilience story in your enterprise. Things like business intelligence analytics, obviously compliance is there, and once again, AI, right? What does it mean to access, let's say, backup data for AI consumption? What does that vector look like from a cyber resiliency tooling perspective? So a lot going on there. That's sort of the level set. Next slide, please, Chris. I'll talk just briefly about Nutanix in the context of this webinar. I think of it as, protecting your environment begins with protecting your apps and data, right? Protecting your business begins with protecting your apps and data. It starts with a secure foundation, right? So it's foundational to your success, having secure cyber or resilient infrastructure. And the good news is that Nutanix has set the stage for HYCU to deliver cyber protection that's embedded from the infrastructure level by default and by design, as Chris and I like to think about it. What we hope to convey to you today is that Nutanix and HYCU share a core principle, and that is that resilience must be built in, not bolted on. Nutanix delivers a hardened foundation for every workload, with obviously our legacy HCI, right? We were part of the first wave of HCI with compute, storage, and networking services all being part of that. Some highlights there. I won't go through all the services you see, but some highlights worth mentioning here. We have built a legacy on self-healing architecture, right? With native high availability and failover, data at rest and encryption, micro segmentation. If you ever need to cordon off a portion of your workload for quarantine or what have you, we have those abilities, right? To do those things dynamically, and we work with HYCU closely on performing those type of exercises. We have unified storage, or NUS as we like to call it, for block and file and object services, all in one platform. And these are all very interesting when you begin to think about that paradigm I showed earlier, where data is the center of the universe, right? Infrastructure matters a lot, but as a Newton, as we like to call ourselves, we don't do it all, right? So we need help from our friends like HYCU. Again, this isn't a Nutanix commercial today, so I'll keep my comments at a high level. But suffice to say that as leaders in the DHI space, the distributed hybrid infrastructure space, according to Gartner, Nutanix, we've spent years ensuring that data protection features remain a mainstay in our products. And frankly, we don't drink our own Kool-Aid. One of the other roles that I had in Nutanix was part of the solutions engineering team. So what do? That's Nutanix putting ourselves to task with Nutanix validated designs, or NVDs, where we design and deploy in-house large-scale solutions to ensure we meet our customers at their business outcomes, where you guys need us most, right? And HYCU has been there since day one. As you'll hear Chris describe in greater detail, we do this with HYCU especially well, as HYCU has been with us, again, every step of the way from the outset. As a PM leader, I'll share this, that I can sincerely say that HYCU has been a tremendous partner. So I've personally valued this relationship, just getting to know Chris a little bit more these days, and it's been great. And it's been the case since day one, right? And so has the feedback been from our joint customers. They really appreciate the level of the partnership, the strength of the partnership, which essentially translates into product, right? The strength of the integration itself. Briefly stated, HYCU extends our cyber resilience in unique ways, as Chris will describe. One more slide before I hand it over, Chris. Just a little snapshot of, from a PM perspective, what does it look like from us, from a Nutanix perspective? For years, the HYCU and Nutanix relationship has been built on three fundamental design goals. which is backup of Nutanix, where HYCU consumes our APIs to take backups of workloads running on Nutanix infrastructure, right? Sort of bread and butter when you think about this type of an integration. Then there's backup on Nutanix, though, where HYCU runs virtual appliances on top of Nutanix infrastructure. And as a result, they enjoy resilient compute services that Nutanix infrastructure provides. And then finally, backup to Nutanix, where HYCU uses Nutanix objects as a storage object, storage target. So lots of reasons, lots of goodness to think about this relationship, to think about what Chris is going to get a little bit deeper into here in a moment. But I'll say that collectively, all of this wrapped up in a simplified management interface as well. So from my perspective, again, I don't want to sound like a broken record here, but really thrilled to be here, really thrilled with this relationship. We've got a lot of things we're looking forward to, a lot of good things that we've been working on at the solution level, which means that as a pair of teams, as a pair of companies, we're working even more closely than ever together to make sure that you're successful with your cyber resilience strategy. So with that said, I'd like to hand the mic over to Chris, who's going to take us the rest of the way. Chris?
Amazing. Thank you, Ed. Thank you. I appreciate that. Yeah, I'm gonna echo a lot of what Ed said throughout of this. So when we start looking at, HYCU, so maybe some of you are new to HYCU or you've never heard of us, or you're a valued customer or a prospect, whatever you are on your journey with HYCU and Nutanix, right? I just want to kind of share some key stats with you, right? So we are the number one data protection platform for Nutanix. What does that mean, right? So more customers, better integration, the widest coverage in the marketplace, right? So as Ed said, we do have those validated designs and those blueprints. So that means that we aren't just telling everyone our version of the story, right? Nutanix have validated that on the other side of the fence and said, yeah, whatever these guys have said is true, right? Here's a document published by Nutanix from Nutanix people to say, yeah, this is all the things that HYCU can do, and here's how you deploy properly, and here's how it integrates all this kind of stuff, right? So it's kind of like, don't just believe me, believe the people that you're trusting with your production data, right? So if you're running Nutanix, right, you're going to trust them, right? That's why you've chosen that platform. Let me look at the type of workloads we cover, right? This is one thing that on Ed's slide that he kind of mentioned is like, I'm relatively new to Nutanix in terms of the whole ecosystem, right? So I was a VMware guy back in the day. I've only been at HYCU about a year or so, so I came in kind of relatively fresh to Nutanix, and I always assumed that Nutanix was virtualization, right? It was just another hypervisor. But actually, when I started looking at it, it was so much more than virtual machines, right? That was almost like that was his first album, right? And now we're on his the ninth that is, we're on a greatest hits even, now. And now you start looking around and there's, Nutanix database service, NUS, which has, file storage, object storage, Prism Central, Edge data. Now we've got Nutanix AI coming out as well, already out in the marketplace and in people's data centers already, NC2. So all these services and all these data sets are all central to everyone's workloads they're running today. You might be running just AHV, but then you're going to be looking at NDB, you're going to be looking at NUS, you're going to be looking at all these other areas, right? And what you don't want is a data protection platform that only covers the bare essentials, right? So then it's going to limit you being able to adopt the best parts of the Nutanix platform, right? And then we flip back to the left-hand side, right? Military grade security. One thing that Ed mentioned was, secure foundations, right? Built from secure ground up, right? So when I say military grade security, what I mean is the best security you can get, right? So DISA, if you're in the US, you'll know what DISA stands for, right? It's the Defense Information Systems Agency, and a STIG is a secure technical implementation guide, right? So essentially, what they've said is the defense and the DISA, those guys have said you can deploy HYCU incredibly securely, and it meets all the defense regulations you need. Essentially saying it can be installed pretty much in any environment in the world, right? If DISA has said that it's good enough for them, everyone else can kind of take that as a stamp of, yeah, if they've seen it and know it and run it, then we know it's good for them, right? NIAP common criteria as well. Again, as that's a combination of USA, Canada, Australia, UK, all coming together and saying, yep, this is the common criteria we would need to secure a platform, and we meet that as well. FIPS 140-3 and all the other ones you can imagine on that screen as well. And we actually do have a lot of military customers as well. So kind of giving you the best of everything, but with that secure value add wrap around it as well. And the one thing I think that I'm most passionate about is our NPS score. And again, this is another kind of like area that Nutanix and HYCU match each other on is customer centric, customer first, and customer. I'm going to say focus, but kind of customer mad, right? We only focus on that outcome for the customers, and that's why we get NPS scores in the 90s as well. So I think it's currently 91 or 92. And this is real. This is externally validated, right? This isn't just us asking on the back end of our support tickets, right? This is surveyed and all the other things, right? That's incredibly hard to do when you're a backup vendor, typically, or a cyber resilience vendor or data protection, because people only use your product when things go wrong. So you're already starting off on a negative, right? Because they've got a problem they need to solve, and that's typically going to be solved by us, right? So for us to have to turn that experience around and say, hey, by the way, 9 out of 10 people would recommend Haiku strongly. That's a really, really proud thing for us to be involved in. So as we move through into kind of ransomware attacks, and this isn't me scaremongering, right? This isn't me saying, oh, by the way, this is going to happen to you. The one thing I kind of want to get across from this slide is a little bit like, look at the names, right? MGM, CDK Global, M&S, if you're in the UK or Europe, Marks and Spencers are, right? Harrods is a worldwide name, right? They're probably billion-dollar companies, if not even tens of billions. It'd be stupid for us to think that they're not spending money on cybersecurity and cyber resilience, right? They've probably got budgets bigger than some people in this called revenue, right? Just for cyber resilience, right? Yet these things still happen to these guys, right? So it doesn't always necessarily mean that the more you spend, the more successful you're going to be, right? You can spend money in the wrong ways, you can spend money in the right ways, and you can utilize tooling that's already available to you as well. And we're going to kind of be covering all of those things today. But this is kind of a slide to kind of say, by the way, guys, like it happens to everybody. The biggest customers obviously get the headlines, but you won't find the ones where I watched a BBC documentary on cybercrime not that long ago, and obviously doesn't get these big headlines. But there was a shipping company in the UK. They've been going for 250 years, right? Shipping stuff around the world and all this type of stuff and moving logistics, even but just with when they had ships and stuff. They got hit with a cyber attack and they had to shut down. So that all that history just went just because their IT systems got breached that one time, right? One mistake, one thing that happened to them, and 300 people lost their jobs. But it doesn't make the headlines, right? Because they weren't a global name, right? But it happens to everybody, small or large. We need to make sure that we're doing the best we possibly can, and especially when we're looking at the small mid-market customers, often they're thinking, oh, well, I can't afford the best tool, so it's bound to happen to me. And I think that's a false narrative, right? A lot of attacks happen because the basics aren't done properly. And if we do the foundations really well and do the basics really well and plug the gaps, then it's going to be incredibly hard to get through. Not to say it won't ever happen, but it's going to be a lot more difficult for them to get through. So this kind of webinar is talking about those three pillars to successful cyber resilience, right? So we're doing 3 pillars here. So the first one being always protected, the second one being always observing, and the third one being always ready. I'm quite a simple person, so I like to keep things really really easy to understand. So this is where I get the 3 rule. I can't remember anything more than 3. So always protected, always observing, and always ready. And we're going to dive into a little bit more about what that kind of means, and what that means on each one of these layers. So if we look at always protected, Ed mentioned this earlier, resilient and secure foundations. It does start from even before you've landed tin in your data centers, right? It starts from your decisions, decisions of to purchase Nutanix or to purchase whatever it might be. If you have to make sure you're deploying it in a way that is resilient from start, right? It's no point patching it on afterwards or trying to bolt it on, as Ed said earlier. It starts with that resiliency at the core. And then, ensuring cyber hygiene. We're going to go through kind of like patching and lifecycle management and those types of things. And then protection of the data is also critical. So what does that kind of mean? So let's look at secure foundations, right? So securing your infrastructure is vitally important. I know Ed mentioned earlier that, backup repositories are the number one attack target for attackers. And also infrastructure is really, really close behind that as well, right? They're the 2 things you need to be able to bounce back from a cyber attack, right? You need some infrastructure to put your data and run your applications, and you need the data from a backup, right? If either of those 2 things are missing, it becomes incredibly difficult to restore. And that's only when you're in a situation where the attackers have the advantage, because your way out is to hopefully pay and hopefully get your stuff back, right? But that's not always the case. So making sure that securing your infrastructure is vital. So that means putting in best practices like MFA, secure access control, hardening the infrastructure underneath, putting all those security things in the loop, but it shouldn't be only on your responsibility, right? So if I take, for instance, HYCU, we give you a pre-hardened appliance, right? So it's not on you to say, hey, by the way, here's a software package, go and deploy Windows or Linux, and by the way, you've got to harden that to whatever standard you think you need to do. We're like, hey, we'll give you the requirement, we'll give you the box, and it's as hardened as we can make it. You can make it even more hardened if you want and turn all these bits off, but here's something that we think is really, really good straight out of the box. And I know Nutanix kind of have a similar ethos of, a hypervisor is hardened by default, and when you set up Nutanix, it tells you all the things you need to do, right? You haven't changed this password, these things haven't been done, these things. So it's really obvious and really easy what you need to do, and it's not, the onus isn't only on the user to do that. And then, as I said before, they're built with that security first mindset. We built HYCU and Nutanix built Nutanix to go after every single customer, right? And if you're going to go after defense and local government agencies and all those types of things around the world, you have to have that secure first mindset. You can't bolt it on afterwards, right? As soon as the first line of code is written in your software stack, you have to think about security. How are you going to secure the code? How are you going to secure the appliance? How are you going to secure the runtimes? All those types of things. And that's how you get the certifications that Nutanix and HYCU have together, because we're resilient from the ground up, and we've built anything with that security first mindset. And as I mentioned before, infrastructure and backups are the biggest targets, right? So if you are being really, really serious about your cyber resilience, you need to make sure that you have a cyber resilient infrastructure, cyber resilient backup software, and also cyber resilient backup target. Those three things combined, you're going to have a way out of whatever happens, as long as you have good infrastructure you can recover to, a good piece of software that you can recover from, and the data to be able to back up to as well, or back up from, sorry. And then we're ensuring cyber hygiene. This one, I think, is a really, really critical piece of the journey, right? So if you start with an amazingly secure stack, amazing. That's where we want to start from, right? Build that really secure foundation in your wall. But guess what? Things change, right? Security vulnerabilities come out every day. Attackers get smarter and change and twist and morph. So what we need to do is, enable hardware lifecycle management, right? So when a new patch comes out, or a new BIOS update happens, right? How do you make sure that's done effectively across your fleet? And if you're a large customer, that could potentially mean, hundreds or thousands of nodes potentially. Or even if you're a small customer, even with a small IT team, 20 nodes patching manually is going to take time. And that might just be we'll do it next Friday, right? Oh, Dave's out of the office this week, so we'll do it next Friday, right? Every time that you delay that, you're giving attackers a window to get into a known vulnerability, right? So I know with Nutanix, super easy to do that lifecycle management. They call it LCM. Go in, essentially go deploy, and it just goes and does everything it needs to do, right? So you've got that one-click efficiency, and everything is on the same version control across the whole board, right? So you haven't got to worry about node A versus node Z, right? They're all going to be the same. So you haven't got someone missing a patch or not applying properly. It's all reported back into that dashboard. And that comes then across into uniform patching and deployment cycles, right? So when we deploy a new node, or we deploy a new OS, or we deploy a new database, Nutanix has the ability to then help you morph that into deploying secure by default, making sure those patches are applied properly, especially things like NDB. If you look at NDB, being able to centralize your patch management for database servers, probably run some of the most critical infrastructure in your environment with databases, being able to kind of centralize that patch management, and reduce that kind of total cost of ownership by not having to do it all manually, massively increases your security footprint. As I said before, stripped back access and operating system. So by default, HYCU has MFA installed, right? You go in and you have a default user, and it immediately tells you to change the password, change a CLI password, enable MFA. And by the way, we've stripped back our operating system, so you can't do all the things that you think you should be able to do, right? Even if you have access, you can't do the things you want to do, right? Because we've stripped it all out. We've made sure it's as minimal as it possibly can be, to become more lightweight and efficient, but also to strip back anything that could be used as an attack vector. And then access controls on top of that, right? You want to enable SSO? Absolutely. You want to do multi-tenancy. So, each business unit only has access to their virtual machines or their database servers or their files. Absolutely. You can do that inside of HYCU, right? We can put that multi-tenancy layer all the way down to their database in HYCU as well. So people only have access to the one specific area they have. And again, all of that is limiting blast radius. If someone gets hold of a set of credentials from myself, right, they can only access my stuff, or the developer stuff, or the database guys, or the infrastructure, right? Whereas if they get hold of someone who didn't have multi-tenancy, it's very much like micro segmentation, right? It's segmenting your stuff into those tenants. So Even if they do get hold of it, all they can do is impact that small section. And then we talk about no data left behind. I think this is a risk. This is a massive one for me. Um, Covering more than just virtual machines. Virtual machines are critical, and they do probably provide the backbone for most organizations still. Containers and cloud native are catching up, but VMs are probably still the backbone of most organizations worldwide. But they need to be protected just as everything else does. But you want to be able to make sure you're recovering everything in your Nutanix estate. Recovery workflows that are then built for Nutanix. As Ed mentioned earlier, we've been with Nutanix from HYCU's inception. HYCU was purpose built to support Nutanix workloads. That was the only workload we did when we first started our product 8, 9, 10 years ago, however long it was. That was the only thing we did. So we built a purpose built product just to support Nutanix, right? What I like to say is like, we supported Nutanix before they got cool. Before they were headlining, Coachella and all that kind of stuff. We were there in the small gigs that, that no one went to, right? We were there at the front with the t-shirt. But that really flows down into how well we know the products and how we can build the workflows that are suitable for Nutanix. I've been doing some research on competitors and stuff. Part of my role, that's my job, right? And look at documentation that's publicly available, and I still see like VMware references in the Nutanix section and stuff like that. And I'm a bit like, well, you can see they've tried to adapt their product and adapt their documentation, but it just doesn't quite match, right? Square peg round hole type of thing. So just those workflows that make sure you're restoring properly, right, and not going to break anything. We have a committed joint roadmap together. This is Ed we mentioned earlier, right? That we work together closely, not just me and you, right? But our engineering teams, they know each other really well. We've actually co-developed APIs together and kind of built products across the two stacks, right? We know each other's expertise, and we know how we do that, and therefore we know where you're going, right? And from a Nutanix land and Nutanix and where your customers are coming with you. So we can help customers on that journey as well, right? We're not being reactive; we're being proactive in that scenario.
Yeah, I would also add, Chris, that that's a great point. And I think I mentioned this earlier that there's a concerted investment between Nutanix and HYCU at the strategic level. So I would say maybe in previous years, when you guys were wearing the t-shirts, we were we did the bare necessities. We did a bunch of extra things, I think, with HYCU, but there's been like I said, there's been a noticeable investment from both companies to up level, right? To take a more customer viewpoint, see solutions through a customer lens, and then precipitate out what features need to be developed to meet those outcomes, right? So I'm just sharing sort of behind the curtains type information that should make people feel a little bit more warm and fuzzy. I think that I know that I'm very close to it. There's a concerted investment between the two companies. Excuse me.
Yeah, 100%. And that kind of goes straight into my next point. Is like, don't underestimate the value of history and partnership, right?
Right.
We know each other's companies very well. We know, like if you rang up HYCU support, for instance, like they know Nutanix inside out, right? They're not trying to figure out what you're saying from a Nutanix point of view. Like they know Nutanix, they're experts in it. They've got loads of certifications, right? They've been doing it for 10 years plus, right? They know what they're doing. And the same with Nutanix. So I know Nutanix SEs and sales guys, right? Who can pitch HYCU just as well as any of the HYCU guys can, right? Because their customers are asking for it and they know it. And they know what it does, they know how it can do, and they've got a back catalog of customers that are really happy with them as well, right? So the two companies know each other, and that history is really important, right? It's not just a flash in the pan. Hey, by the way, in this moment in time where we've got this joint thing together, it's look at the history we've had over the year and look where we're going to continue that onwards as well. So as we move into always observing, just a reminder, everyone, if you have any questions or want any clarity or anything on what we're saying, please just pop anything into the chat. I'm happy to answer questions as we go along. But as we look at always observing, so this is where things get a little bit more, I'm going to say interesting, but a lot of that was fundamentals and securing infrastructure and foundational. So always observing, indicator of compromise, so looking for things that may indicate compromise. Threat hunting, actively looking for threats in data sets. And then the big one for me is visibility. Being able to see everything, being able to see what you want to see, and cut the noise as well. So if we look at active threat hunting to start with, So this is a HYCU technology. We call it R Shield. R Shield is kind of our cyber resiliency fabric that flows through the whole of the HYCU ecosystem. It's not a bolt-on, not a SKU, not a purchasable item, right? It kind of comes as part of the HYCU package, if you will. But within that, we have a threat hunter, right? So that helps us detect active malware within workloads, right? The beauty of the way we do it is exactly what Ed said in the first or the second slide. I think it was the second slide, or maybe in the third slide, right? It happens on Nutanix. So we don't take your data away and put it into our cloud and crunch some stuff using AI and ML, whatever else, and then give you the results, right? Your data stays at source at all times. So we essentially use the really clever capabilities under the hood of the storage system of Nutanix, do what we need to do, and then scan on cluster. So that means we do use a little bit of compute from Nutanix, right? But guess what? They're incredibly efficient with the way they do things with their storage as well. But things are happening quicker, faster because it's on production storage, right? We're not backing up to a slow box and trying to do analytics and those types of things. We're doing it on cluster and then reporting back once we find anything we need. That then helps you ensure your sovereignty and control because a lot of customers running on-premise workloads, they want to know their data's secure and safe. And especially in the UK, Europe, things like DORA and all those types of regulatory compliance, sending it off to someone else's cloud is a massive risk, massive red flag, right? Even just sending it into a cloud, even if you own it, can still have problems and risk associated with that. So, making sure it stays on cluster, on premise, in your control, the data path is 100% yours and owned. This happens completely independently of the backup chain. So the backups happen, and then we scan in parallel to the backups happening. So we don't slow the backups down, so they don't happen in line. So your backups are still going to be there and recoverable, even if the scanning hasn't completed. So if you have a massive problem and and it's not a ransomware thing, you can still recover right back to that point in time. But what essentially we do is we scan it as quickly as we can, and then we update the backup to say, yeah, we've scanned it and it's all clean. So that is kind of the best of both worlds. We don't have to wait for the backup to complete before we start scanning, and we don't have to wait for the scan to complete before we finish the backup. It's kind of like the nice way of both happening at the same time, so we don't slow down either side. And the beauty of this is we have no specific hardware requirements, right? Because it happens on Nutanix, your workload's already running there. We know we're compatible with everything you're running. Therefore, we don't have to have our own particular HYCU box to run it on. We don't have to have a particular cloud. We don't have to have a particular place you store the data. As long as it's running on Nutanix, we can do it, right? So we kind of open up that flexibility. So if you want to do a direct to cloud architecture and use, S3 objects in AWS to store your backups, you can absolutely do that, right? And you can still make use of the scanning capability. You don't have to store it on our box, or we don't even have a box, by the way. I'm not selling it as a thing we don't have to use. We don't even have a box to sell, right? And then we look at indicators of compromise. So I know the Nutanix has some cool stuff with FlowEd and those types of things. So, auditing traffic, things like data lens as well for unstructured data. I know we kind of I say we overlap. We don't overlap, but like no, data lens does a very similar thing that the active threat hunting does, but for unstructured data, right? So
Exactly.
we looked to do unstructured data, and we still might, right? It might be on our roadmap. We might carry on doing it. We might build out. But guess what? Like customers who are using data lens, they might not want to use another tool. We've spoken about being efficient with budgets, and just because you buy more things doesn't mean you guarantee success, right? So if you're already using data lens, is there any point to having another tool that does the same thing, right? Maybe not. So again, we're trying to fill the gaps that Nutanix has, and Nutanix fill the gaps that HYCU has, right? So it's a really, really nice partnership that blends well together. And then we have backup posture management from HYCU, and that sounds really like a fun term, but but backup posture management is essentially looking at things like if you're storing data in a Nutanix object store, right? You got an S3 bucket, you set that bucket up, and it's nice and private, nice and secure, off network, and away it goes. If suddenly that bucket pops up with public access, something's changed in that environment, for instance, right? So now suddenly that has public access. That's not necessarily to say there's been a breach of that, but something's changed, right? So we're gonna flag that inside of HYCU and say, by the way, guys, best practice is not to have your S3 bucket with public access. Maybe go and look at that. That's an indicator of compromise. We're looking at data set changes. Has anything changed in the data set? So yesterday, the amount of data that your backup was this, right? The change rate was 3%. Today it's 49%, right? That's anomalous. That looks a bit strange. So we're gonna flag that and potentially say, by the way, guys, like You need to look into this because it could be nothing, right? It could be one of your database guys dumping two databases onto a system, and the change rate's huge. Of course, that's going to be thing, but it's still anomalous, and we still look at it, right? And then the last key thing is visibility. Um, Building security dashboards from Nutanix, right? So we have not just your infrastructure view, but you have actually a security dashboard inside of Prism Central, right? So it tells you what everything you need to know from your patching levels, your lifecycle management, and all that kind of stuff, right? So really, really simple, really easy to view. And this is across HYCU and across Nutanix, but cross cluster, geo, and cloud visibility, right? And I hate single pane of glass. I hate that phrase because I don't think ever anyone can have a single pane of glass for everything, right? Because you would just be looking at a very, very big pane of glass. But having enough information in a single view that you can make informed decisions across all your environment, right? We know now today, and Nutanix know even better than myself, right? Customers are running on-premise workloads, they're running in public cloud on NC2, and they're running at the edge as well, right? Having all of that visibility in one place, so Prism Central, or even Nutanix Central as well, right? Having that kind of place to look at it, look at everything, and say, that looks strange. I've got a recommendation here from Nutanix. And you can do the same with HYCU, right? So whether you're running Nutanix in on-premise, NC2, at the edge with the robo sites, whether you're running public cloud natively, you can report that all into a single dashboard, running anywhere you like, and then essentially report that out, across how many clusters you have, or across how many users you have, or whatever it might be. So kind of giving you that visibility to see everything in one place without having to click through multiple different products, multiple different UIs, multiple different things. Simple reporting and alerting. This is one for me where you can have the most powerful reporting and alerting engine in the world, right? They could do everything, but if no one knows how to use it, it kind of becomes a bit pointless. What you want to be able to put the alerts wherever you want them, whenever you want them, and for what you want them for. And that then brings me on to the extensibility, right? So HYCU, everything can be put using webhooks. So you can put that into your SIEM or your source systems. You can put it into Slack. You can put it into Teams. You can put it into wherever you want, right? So you can have a Slack channel with your cyber team, your infrastructure team, your storage team, and your networking team, right? And when we see active malware in a workload, it can dump the alert straight into a Slack channel. Everyone gets note of it, and every single person that thing can react in whatever they need to do, right? Rather than it going to the Nutanix team or the backup team, them having to phone the network guy and then phone this guy and do that and try and get hold of this guy. Go straight into that. Everyone's got available information straight where they need it. So it's all about visibility. So when we kind of recap that, actively looking for threats in workloads, right? So I know Data Lens does that, and obviously HYCU R Shield Scanner does that as well. Looking using YARA rules, looking deep into workloads, looking for malicious payloads. And then looking for indicators of compromise, for things that may be a bit odd in the environment, things that don't look quite right, or things that have changed, making sure that we kind of look at what was good and what maybe isn't good so good now, or what's changed or what's tweaked, or maybe it's just config drift over a period of time, but that config drift can still then expose security gaps as well. And then visibility, being able to see everything and being able to observe everything from a single pane of glass, or a single view, or a single place to consume your security information. And then we look at always ready, continuous validation, rapid flexible recovery, and then isolated recovery environments. So if we look at always ready, so I'm going to cover some Nutanix native recovery, which you think, hey, Chris, you work for HYCU, should we talk about HYCU? Of course, of course. But I really do believe that Nutanix has some really, really great capabilities built into their platform today, right? So you're probably already licensed for them, so you can probably use them today. If not, speak to your account team. I'm sure they can tell you exactly how you can make use of these, right? But HYCU adopt a lot of the principles that Nutanix have, and we actually hook into a lot of the technologies that Nutanix have ready to kind of bolster or add value to what they already do as well. So they have built-in disaster recovery workflows, right? So you can do orchestration, you can do data replication with a super efficient replication engine under the hood with Nutanix, right? So for instance, one of the really cool integrations we have is for edge sites, robo sites. So I'm just going to take a drink quickly. So if you have, let's say you have, 50 manufacturing plants around the US, all running Nutanix at the edge, and you have a core DC somewhere. You want to replicate all those 50 back into the core DC for disaster recovery purposes. Cool. But you want to back those up as well, right? So rather than deploying 50 versions of backup to all these edge places, right? We've already got a copy of the data centrally. So what HYCU can do is just deploy it in that central DC, look at all the data copies that Nutanix are already replicating inwards, and then back up the replica copies. So you haven't got to send two lots of data, your DR or your replica copy and your backup data centrally to the repository. We back up from the central location. It means it's super efficient, super easy to do, and we're essentially hooking into what Nutanix is already doing. So again, kind of that deeper layer of integration rather than just saying we can back up the VMs. If we can back up the VMs in this scenario where it's super efficient for customers to do that, and then when it comes to recovery, right, we can recover out 20 of those places from that central location
Yeah,
as well.
Chris, those are great points. I think I'll just add that the customers I talk to, they, it's all about orchestration, right? If a disaster or any kind of attack happens, so much of it is about recovering as quickly as possible. So having these integrated recovery and orchestration tools that work intimately and natively together between the two companies, I think is paramount, right? And it really has paid dividends for customers that have deployed it. So I would say, yeah, I just adding a little extra color there.
No,
You know,
absolutely.
yeah, just orchestration is a big deal. And yeah, Nutanix has been doing that very well for a long time. And yeah, so yeah, orchestration, just a key point there.
100% agree. 100% agree. Let me look at the efficient snapshot technology. As I mentioned before, this kind of blew me away when I learned about this, and I had to learn really really quickly about this because in my previous life, snapshots were a bad word, right? When I was looking at VMware, like we wanted to, we wrote scripts to clean up snapshots because they would affect in performance and all these types of things. And then we started looking at it, and people were saying, oh yeah, we're using Nutanix snaps, and I'm like, oh god, we shouldn't be using snapshots. But actually, the way that Nutanix do snapshots is incredibly clever, incredibly efficient of no impact to production workloads, right? So we actually utilize Nutanix snapshots inside of HYCU to actually do the data protection. We have the fastest possible recovery um, from any vendor in the world because we use Nutanix snapshots, right? So we can keep a HYCU owned snap running on Nutanix, they're ready to go, and you can revert instantly back from any outage or even ransomware or cyber threat. And then you've got built-in tooling such as NDB Time Machine, right? A really, really cool piece of kit. I actually did a webinar with the NDB team from Nutanix a little while back as well, and we kind of deep dive this a little bit more in terms of the integration. So look that up if you're more interested in this. But you know, there's a lot of capabilities inside of Nutanix to help you recover from various different outages, right? Like it could be ransomware, it could be fat fingered, and I've done my fair amount of that in the past. I'm sure everybody has, right? But then there's also HYCU recovery, right? What can HYCU do to complement this as well, right? So we have, as I mentioned before, the fastest restoring Nutanix workloads, right? Get your VMs back up and running, I'm going to say near instantly, almost as quick as it can possibly do it. And we have that full granularity and control. So whereas, Nutanix might be able to recover the volume or the VM, right? We can do the individual file, the folder, the permissions, those types of things as well, where it's more niche, more specialized, but then also have the control and the compliance that goes with that, right? With the reporting engine, know your RTO with RTO assurance, all those types of things, immutability, taking it off cluster, all that kind of stuff that you're going to need to meet compliance and regulatory needs. We can do that cross hypervisor and cross cloud recovery, right? So we're seeing a huge wave of people coming from alternative hypervisors to the Nutanix environment, right? Biggest threat they have. I mean, I didn't even put Nutanix Move on this as Nutanix native tooling, but Nutanix Move, an amazing piece of kit, right? But some people are still nervous about, or if I move, how do I protect while I move, right? So what HYCU does is we install on VMware or wherever else it might be, and we install a Nutanix, right? And every workload is protected whilst it moves, and then as soon as it lands on Nutanix, it's automatically protected by Nutanix as well, right? So you're protected. So even if it goes wrong or something happens or you want to revert back, right, you've always got a copy that you can go back to in the old version as well. We offer continuous automated validation. So this essentially means, right, we can automatically on a schedule, however often you want, whatever backups you want, we can then place back into Nutanix, boot them up, run some scripting if you want to run some scripting to see what's happening inside the VMs, check services, whatever else you want to do. But essentially, then report back to HYCU and say, yep, this is recoverable. So that is from the HYCU R-Shield scanner clean, and it's valid recoverable data. So when you're in that workflow of trying to recover data, you don't have to go to 3 different places to look. It's clean and validated with 2 ticks next to it, so you can recover that data in confidence. And then I mentioned before, know your RTO. And this is quite unique from HYCU. So essentially, everyone knows typically what their RPO is going to be. or trying to be. Um, but actually, inside of HYCU, you can set your RTO, which most people say, well, how are you going to set your RTO, right? So essentially, in our policy, you choose your RPO, you choose your RTO, and then we do everything for you. So we tell you your RPO is this. So we schedule all the backup jobs. You don't have to go in and run a calendar, set of jobs, figure out how to load balance, all that kind of stuff. We essentially take care of all of that. So your workloads, if you have a 24-hour RPO, will be backed up at least once a day, right? We'll meet your RPO. And then your RTO, we can't speed up your storage, right? But we can tell you when your storage slows down or something happens. So if your RTO is 2 hours, right? We're going to tell you real time. We can recover that data back in 15 minutes, right? And in the dashboard, you're able to see, you hover over and it says, yeah, we can recover this data in 15 minutes, right? But that's done in live time as well. So if something changes, like someone changes a file rule or a routing protocol, or a disk gets degraded on a storage array or something, and that speed slows down, or something suddenly isn't available, we're going to flag that you're no longer in compliance. So you've told us you need to recover within 2 hours, and now it's going to take 3 hours. So suddenly you get all these warnings, you get HYCU telling you in Slack, in Teams, wherever else you've configured it for, that you're no longer in compliance. Or for a great a great thing is, a lot of the times a business or an IT director or a board member will say, we have to recover all our data within an hour. And you go, okay, cool, give me some budget for some. They go, no, you can't have any more budget. We'll configure your RTO in HYCU, right? And it will tell you what we can achieve. And you can go back to your board and say, by the way, with currently what I've got, this is what we can achieve. HYCU is telling me this is what we can achieve. So we either speed up the storage, we reduce the data set down, or whatever else we're going to do, but this is what we can achieve. So it's a really nice balancing act to be like, by the way, this is what the technology is telling me we can do. It's not a process problem. It's like, it's physics, right? We can't move data from A to B quick enough. So what are we going to do? So it's very, very simple. And then we have the power of both. This is where we really kind of like shine together, and how the solutions kind of mesh together. Isolated recovery using HYCU and flow networking, right? So exactly what Ed mentioned earlier, microsegmentation. So if, say, HYCU scanner, you're backing up a workload with HYCU, the HYCU architectured scanner scans it, and there's potential ransomware in there, right? It's found a little payload or found something that looks suspicious in there. You can essentially get Flow to isolate off a virtual clean room, so it's not available to any other network partitions. HYCU can restore into that environment, and then you can do your analytics, right? So you can get your Tiger teams come in, your red teams, or whoever else, or your external consultant to come in and say, yeah, that is, it's a payload. Let's cleanse it and recover it. Or actually, this needs a bit more effort or investigation. But the risk is being reduced because we're not allowing that to then spread. Because last thing we want to do is do, infection loops, and, start infecting more things because we're putting stuff back in that we shouldn't be putting back in.
Yeah, I think that goes back to the orchestration comment earlier, right? This is done seamlessly, easily, and quickly, I think is the point, right? Especially when you're under the gun.
Yeah, that we've got people at HYCU who understand, the Nutanix Calm, or what it's, cloud management, or whatever it's called now, self-service cloud management. To kind of like you change the names all the time. We keep getting told off for using the wrong names. But we have guys at HYCU who know how to build that stuff out, right? So you can say to them, yeah, I want to have a workflow in Nutanix that separates off an environment that HYCU can then point to, right? Yeah, we can help you do that, right? We can help you. We have customer success engineers at HYCU that come free of charge for every single customer. Every customer will have a success engineer, which is different to support, by the way. I will be very, very clear. Support is when there's a problem. Our customer success engineers go, you bought HYCU for this reason. How can we help you achieve your goals, right? So they're there to make sure our customers are successful. Hence why they're called customer success. Let me look at clean room recovery, right? This is maybe for your large organizations, or not exclusively, but having a completely separate, isolated Nutanix cluster that can be run individualized, air gapped away. We can essentially import the backups into it, install a fresh version of HYCU, or have it running their isolated environment in kind of DR mode, if you will, import the backups from there, and then you can then restore into a known clean environment. So you kind of are minimizing the impact. So I've had customers previously at previous roles where they were ready to go back and recover, but actually the agencies in the US decided that they wanted to take a little bit of a closer look at this because it could have been state sponsored or something. So they said, yeah, your infrastructure's on lockdown, so you can't reuse that, so use something else. And that's where a clean room would really, really, really work, because that's clean. It's not been impacted by the same attack, and you can recover with confidence inside of there as well. As we mentioned, kind of really, really far back in the presentation, right? Jointly designed workflows and jointly designed APIs, right? So if I take, for instance, I'm going to use two use cases here. The first one being a jointly designed API. So Nutanix Files, an amazing product from Nutanix. Centralize all your file server storage on Nutanix Unified Storage. Nutanix engineers came to HYCU and said, we need to build a change file tracking API, right? Because we want to make it super efficient to be able to understand what's been changed in the environment, right? Rather than trawling through everything, doing a load of calculation and figuring out what's changed, we need an API to help. They came to us and we helped co-design an API that we then now consume as part of our backup infrastructure, right? So if you're doing Nutanix files backup with HYCU, we use an API that we help build. That's a really, really, it's a really nice way. And then the second part is the opposite direction. We were building backup and protection and data protection for NDB. So we went to the engineers who built NDB and said, how do you think is best if we do this, right? And what do you need for recovery workflows? How do you need it to work so we don't break things, right? So you'll notice some kind of subtle differences in our product. So if you're protecting a SQL database that isn't enrolled in NDB and a SQL database that is, inside of HYCU, you'll see some subtle differences. You won't be able to truncate the transaction logs on SQL if it's in NDB, right? Because if you did that with HYCU, that would break Time Machine, right? And if you restored over the top of NDB without knowing it's NDB aware, you could even break production NDB workloads as well. So it's all these kind of nuance where you start scratching away at the surface, and this is where HYCU really shines, is where there's deep level of intricacy, a deep level of expertise needed. And it's not just another database, right? It's not just another VM. It's not just another file server. There's some really deep level of knowledge you need to know and understand about Nutanix to be able to design a platform properly and understand it. And then, the last piece here is we're experts in each other's technology. I think we've kind of demonstrated, I know a lot about Nutanix. Ed knows a lot about HYCU, and we're just the guys talking to you, right? Our guys that build products and, sell the products and engineer solutions know it even better. They cross-reference it constantly together. Hence why we have validated designs on both sides, right? We know how to deploy into Nutanix. Nutanix knows how to deploy into us. And I think the biggest thing here is when we say experts in each other's technology, is that Nutanix are actually a paying customer of HYCU. Right, so Nutanix use HYCU internally to back up their own workloads. So if there was something, more integrated, easier to use, better aligned with Nutanix, they'd be using it, right? Of course they would. But they've been a happy customer for HYCU for a long time now. So that kind of shows the power of the partnership together. Is that they're happy to pay for our to use our software, right? And it's not a freebie, right? With they're paying customers, and that kind of shows the power of the both. So kind of a little bit of a recap. This synergy isn't accidental, right? This isn't something that just we looked at the both products and went, oh God, there's a lot of things we've got in common. Let's do a webinar together and see if we can make a story out of this, right? This has been years, or maybe even a decade or more now, of resiliency by design, right? The resiliency of both companies, sometimes independently, right? To be how do we make the best product we can and as secure as we can independently, but also together to say, how do we build things together? How is there product gaps that HYCU needs to fill from Nutanix, and how is there gaps that Nutanix potentially have? And essentially, we listen to our customers, right? Hence why we've got NPS scores in the 90s, right? So we'll have a customer say, oh, I've got this problem. And we can say, oh, by the way, I think Nutanix can help you sort that problem, right? And equally, then the Nutanix guys are going to say, oh, we think HYCU can help you sort that. And, we've been talking, in the brief time we've known each other, Ed, for the last few weeks or so. We've been talking about integrations that we go, oh, that could work, and we've got a problem working on this, and how do you think we can help? And suddenly we start to kind of snowball that effect. So it's as I said before, it's not accidental. This is by design. And then a few outcomes, right? I want to kind of just give people to land on. So sometimes the answer isn't more budget, right? I think we can get trapped in a loop of buying the next shiny tool, right? Going out and buying this AI enabled, fancy monitoring, right? I'm not saying those things don't work. What I'm saying is if you don't have the secure and the basics done properly, those things will work, but it'll be too late. They were detected a breach as it's happened because it's easy to get in through the back door, right? It's like having the best secure locks on your front door, but then leaving the back door wide open, right? People are not going to be going in through the front; they're going in through the back. Utilize tooling that is already available to you. If you are a Nutanix and a HYCU customer, all the things we've spoken about today is available today for you to utilize, right? So make sure you're talking to your Nutanix your Nutanix rep and your Nutanix sales team, your sales engineers, and all your ecosystem and your partners to say, "Hey, how can I utilize more of what I'm already purchasing, right? How can I utilize Flow, and how can I utilize NCM, and how can I utilize NDB, and all these other things that we're already doing and already have access to harden my security posture and make me harder to attack and better to recover." And then the obvious one, right? Start with the foundations and build up across to complete the stack, right? So start with secure foundations. Make sure your cyber hygiene is good. Make sure you're protecting and choosing vendors that you think are going to help you along your journey. And then you can start looking at what gaps you have. And I'm not saying, and I don't think Ed would support me in this by saying like Nutanix and HYCU isn't the complete solution, right? We're not here to say if you buy Nutanix and you buy HYCU, all of your cyber resilience problems are solved, right? No, like we're not a SIEM system, we're not a source system, we're not a threat vulnerability management system, right? We're not any of those things, right? But we can be a very big part of securing that infrastructure and backup foundational pieces, right? We can be very, very strong together, and you can fill a lot of void with the two solutions together. So I do have a quick poll I'm just gonna launch out quickly. So hopefully, oops, I think I just ended the poll too quickly. Bear with me 1 second. Don't know if I can reactivate it now. Relaunch poll. There we go. Yes. Okay. So yeah. So would you like to schedule a demo with us? Like, feel free if you want to. Also do that. I'll end the poll in just a second. But a little bit of call to action from everybody, right? There's some blogs and a webinar, a data sheet, a really cool cyber resilience checklist. So if you're a Nutanix admin or a sysadmin guy, or gal, click on that, or scan the QR code to get a nice checklist to be able to do all the things. Or if you want to learn a bit more about HYCU Shield and all the kind of cool things we've spoken about, go on there and request a demo through there. And obviously, if you've clicked, you'd like a demo through our poll, then obviously our team will be reaching out to you and scheduling that straight away. But on that, we have a few minutes, so if anyone has any questions, feel free to raise them. I think we only had one. Yeah, so one which is
Yeah, it's
which
just
is
about. Yeah,
yeah,
when
where the
is
recording.
is it going to be? Yeah, exactly.
Yeah, I said that beginning, but if you missed it, yes, there will be a recording. It'll be posted on YouTube and on our HYCU website. You'll also receive it in your inbox as well. So you'll get that. But if there's any more questions, we've got literally 2 minutes, I think, before the top of the hour that we can answer. So I'll wait out just a couple of moments. If anyone has one, please pop it into the chat now. But if not, Ed, amazing. Thank
Yeah.
you for joining me. And I'm sure this won't be the last time we're speaking together on a session. I'm sure we'll have some more things coming in the pipeline. So I know it doesn't look like there's any more any more questions coming through in the chat. So we'll end it there. But thank you very much for joining me, and thank you everyone for your time, and hopefully you found it insightful, and it's been a good part of your day. So thank you very much,
Thanks.
everybody, and we'll see you all on the next one.
Thanks, everyone.